I'm a visiting scholar at KU Leuven currently. My research focuses on the computational links between structure and function. I'm going to actually start a postdoc position at EPFL at the Bluebrain project next month. So it's really relevant to that work. It's really about the links between structure and function, the topology of the networks, and how it can relate to at least a very simple functional network like the Hopfield network. That's why I start from this kind of very simple network first. We know a lot about it. It has been 40 years we work on it, but just to start simple, I start with the Hopfield network and try to see how I can relate topology with functionality. I think I will go directly to my first slide. This work, just to be sure, I want to be grateful to my collaborators, is in collaboration with Elias Renzeperis, who is in this room and has a talk after, and with Professor Kees van Leuven at KU Leuven. Okay, so just to talk, that's maybe a very typical image from that explains image reconstruction. You corrupt an image with some noise and you feed it into the Hopfield network and it's able to reconstruct it very easily. So one canonical function of the cortex is to store and reconstruct like memories of stimulus that we encounter throughout the world. And that might be one typical simple functionality that would be canonical. We can think that is canonical for cortex. But typically recurrent neural networks that are used, like the Hopfield network, are insanely inefficient, like they're fully connected, which is really far from what we see in the brain. Like, for example, and you see it, the cortical sparsity is around 5%. Here it's 100%. And the cortex, with this sparsity, managed to be highly efficient and still keep high functionality. It can do this kind of task very efficiently. So I will try to show you in this talk how the network can be pruned, a Hopfield network, up to about 10% sparsity in the range of cortical sparsity and still maintain its functionality. And how also these pruning change the topology of the network, and finally the topology looks like what we see in the cortex. So I'll skip it to this. So the cortex forms, as I told you, it has a particular topology. It forms first intricate short path connectivity. So here, if we look at this, which represents a typical topological space, I'm not an expert in topology. I know that some people have done some great talks about topology. So, but bear with me. If I make a mistake, please correct me. I'm really grateful for any of your feedbacks. So in a topological space spanning typical regular and very ordered graph, like regular lattice on the left side, where the path is pretty long to reach from one node to another node, the path is pretty long compared to a fully connected graph or compared to a randomly connected network. To, on the other extreme, this randomly connected network, same number of nodes, same number of edges, but completely randomly connected. It has been shown, and it's highly thought now, that the cortex has a small world kind of topology, where it's clustered like regular lattice or fully connected network, but it still maintains short paths so that the transmission of information throughout the network is very efficient, like what we could see in random network or like fully connected network. But it's more efficient than a fully connected network. So the neocortex local network connectivity, which is its layer organization, the properties of the electrophysiological properties of the neurons are well documented, and like you can refer to, and like this is of course we say Mark Ram paper because I'm going to work in his team. He has a good reconstruction in 2015 in the Cell paper of the neocortical, a lot of the neocortical information that are available today. And the connection of the cortex are recurrent, so bidirectional direction in red here, within areas and within cells, like within microcircuits. And a recent study by Rayman in 2021 showed that there are also a particular organization around cliques. So you have cliques that are 2 cliques where only 2 neurons are connected, fully connected, or you have 3 cliques, 4 cliques, 5 cliques. Those are every time structures of fully connected neurons. And this structure organizes the cortex, and they bound together into what he calls cavities. Cavities are these entire structure that binds together a lot of cliques and have particular properties in terms of information propagation. That same study has provided also a very comprehensive reconstruction of this microcircuit connectivity, and I talk about click. It will be useful later for some of the results I show. He shows that if you look at the blue line here, it's reconstruction of the neocortical microcircuit. I think about 31,000 neurons of 1 millicolumn of the cortex, and it shows the distribution of those different clicks. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clicks, how they are distributed compared to 3 known models that are completely random connectivity model. And it shows that they are simplex dimension because click can be converted in 3 dimensions. It shows that the one with a lot of fully connected neurons, for example, the one with the 5 or 6 or 7 fully connected motifs, are much more prevalent than what is observed in a random network. So that has some particular property in terms of information propagation and information integration. So one pervasive and one interesting property that I'm particularly interested here is a sparse connectivity of the network. So I will try to go fast here. That's an example of a mini colon, about 31,000 neurons. If you look at layer 2, 3, just this little square here, we'll look only at this 200 micron volume. A recent study by Leuven et al. In 2003 has shown that on average, within this small volume, neurons are connected with about 5% sparsity. They are not fully connected. Only one neuron is connected on average within, let's say, a group of 600 neurons. One neuron receives projection only from 30 other neurons. So it's really sparsely connected. And it can go from 9 to 1% depending on the distance. The further the neurons are from each other, and the sparser the connection. Now, theoretical studies have used a very simplified schematic model of this neocortical, let's say, of the neocortex, the Hopfield networks attractor dynamics. Use it as a principal mechanism to store and retrieve information information about stimulus memory. But as I told you, it's fully connected and very far from the neocortical connectivity. So what Hopfield network, and I go very fast on this because Curto has talked about it, Dr. Curto, and much better than me, she has introduced it. It's fully connected. Each neuron in that network here, these circles are neurons, just for a 3-neural network. Each neuron receives 1 stimulus element. So if a stimulus is an image, each neuron receives 1 pixel of the stimulus. The activation of each neuron is linear and thresholded. Here, the activation with state Si at the next time step will be basically assigning the local field, which is all the afferent activity from all the neurons that are the neighbors of that neuron, all the neurons that send projection to that neuron, minus some threshold, and the state can be either 1 or -1 for activated or not activated. So with this simple rule, you can activate or not activate a neuron based on all the afferent input to that neuron. Then the connections between these neurons, they are symmetric. Here I just show them as a bidirectional connection for simplicity because I will use directed recurrent network later. They are symmetric and updated via the Hebs rule, which is basically that the weights are proportional to the covariance of the activity. When they activate together, when they fire together, they activate the weight more, they increase the weight, otherwise they depress the weight. So a final feature of the network is the way the activity propagates. So basically the network is randomly and asynchronously updated many times entirely. And that's an important feature because it allows this kind of reconstruction process by iterating and updating the network. When you typically give to the network one very corrupted or noisy stimulus, the network is able to update and reconstruct dynamically the correct version of that stimulus. This is also an error correction process. It can be related to statistical inference. All these are very similar functionalities. So I will skip that part. I think that's better. And I will go directly to the question, which is based on all the things we've seen before. It becomes natural to ask, how does a Hopfield network's topology and recognition accuracy change when we make it sparser? When we try to make it much closer to the cortical connectivity pattern, can it still maintain if I remove 90% of its connection, can it still maintain its ability to reconstruct a stimulus? And how does the topology change? And the second question I asked, because we know Hopfield of very, very simple network, can we generalize that to a directed recurrent neural network that are actually processing more complex stimuli, like continuous intensity stimuli, not just this binary stimuli, but continuous intensity stimuli. So ability to generalize, basically. Something that looks more like the dynamics of the brain. So to test the Hopfield network, I use a very simple task. A Hopfield network of 32 neurons fully connected. I train it with 4, 30, or 64 stimuli in a very simple recognition task. So I use a different number of stimuli because I challenge the memory of the network. The more stimuli you have, the harder it is to be able to reconstruct. The same for humans. And then the network is pruned down to many different levels of sparsity, from 90% to 10% up to entirely disconnected, and I look at how that affects the functionality of the network. Then I submit the network to the test stimulus, and I ask it to the network to identify that stimulus compared to the training pool, to be able to see whether the network actually recognizes the stimulus that were used during training compared to other stimulus, something we could do ourselves. It's to identify the stimulus and reconstruct it and then identify it. Here, I will just define the metric of accuracy that I use for all the graph later. It's just the proportion of correct inference that the network will be able to make. Every time the network will be able to recognize the correct stimulus that were used during training, the prompt stimulus, versus the other, it's a correct choice. Otherwise, it's an incorrect choice. And that will be affected by the memory load, number of stimulus, and by the sparsity of the network. So that's one first result. It's not new. It's something known in the literature. We just stochastically prune the network, which means every time we choose any random connection, any number, like I choose first 0, which is the first time with a rectangle, is a fully connected network. It has perfect accuracy on the top, on the very dark red, it's fully connected with perfect accuracy. Only 4 training stimuli. It's very easy for the network to remember and to recognize the stimulus. Then I increase the number of training stimuli to 16, then to 32, the network's accuracy drops down drastically. This is very well known. The memory load is too high compared to the network storage capacity. It crashes, but still have above chance accuracy. Now, what happens is when I increase the sparsity of the network, so initially the first point is 900 edges, which is fully connected. All the edges are there. 0 is no edges, completely disconnected. And in between is all the different levels of sparsity. You see that in the top condition for stimuli, the accuracy kind of remain high and then start dropping to chance level. And it's the same thing, it gradually drops for all the different memory loads. So sparsity, as expected, reduces the accuracy and the functionality of the network. And that's what you see here. Now, and that's a question that was not known. That's the answer to the question. When you use a different pruning scheme, instead of just randomly pruning the network, you use the variance of the weight. The weight have statistic over time. They kind of reflect the statistic of the stimuli. You can use the magnitude of the weight, or you can use their variance over time to decide which way to prune or not. When you use the variance and you prune based on that, you see that on the top, the solid line, maintain accuracy up to 10% sparsity. The network is still able to perform very well, up to 10% sparsity. And you even have improvement for these red and orange. You have this slight bump up, an improvement, even for network with 10% sparsity. So this is something that was very interesting to me. And it shows that variance pruning can improve the performance of the network, even for very low sparsity. So now, why does pruning, the most unstable weight, improve accuracy? And why does the accuracy drastically drop? As you've seen, after this critical sparsity, you have a sudden drop after 10% sparsity. So here, the simple answer is, and can be proven mathematically, there is a relationship between the magnitude and the variance of the weights in a Bernoulli distributed, with Bernoulli distributed stimuli in Hebbian learning, you have a relationship, an inverse relationship. When the weight variance increase across trials, which is the x-axis, the weight magnitude will decrease when they are positive, like those dots here, and they will increase when they are negative, which means the weight variance and magnitude, absolute magnitude, are completely inversely correlated, which means when you prune based on the most unstable weight, you basically remove the largest weight, the one who's, the weakest weight, the one who has the least impact on the network's activity, which is why basically variance pruning works, at least like that in Hopfield networks. Now, what I looked at next is how it changes the topology of the network, how that correlates with the change in the topology. Here you see that in the conditions where you have a high memory load in red and in orange, you have an improvement in accuracy. I wanted to understand why and whether the topology can explain that. It's hard to see why dropping some weight will improve accuracy, but maybe a change in the topology, in the speed of transmission of the information, something could explain that. So what I looked at are the blue line. When I look at the blue line with tight dash line, I see that that's the amount of, sorry, why is there no x-axis? Yes, sorry, it's not clear here on Google slide, but it's very clear that it will be hard to read. I'm very sorry about that. This is the amount of clustering, which are any triangle shape. All the triangles, the cliques I talked about in the beginning, they decrease across sparsity. There are less and less triangle shape, less and less clustering. So information is more and more locally processed and less propagate globally to the network. And it's even faster when you do variance pruning. And that might be maybe a change in topology that explains why you have an improvement in accuracy compared to stochastic pruning, where the accuracy just keeps decreasing. Then now I looked at what happened to the size of the largest clique. The cliques can be, as I told you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They can have many nodes. But what you see, they are shrinking over time. The size of the cliques also shrinkens, which further confirm that there's more local processing, and it's less in a global cluster, the information. And it's faster for variance pruning again. It has a stronger effect than stochastic pruning. And finally, the length of the path of the network, which means the distance between any two nodes, increases more when you do variance pruning compared to when you do stochastic pruning. So there are like very different changes in topology of the graph of the network when you do variance versus stochastic pruning that correlates with the improvement in accuracy. So I will skip this. This is in another condition, and the conclusion is that the result holds. So I don't know why there are these weird patterns, but anyway. This is just to show you that what happens after this time 10% accuracy. This window in dash line, at this period, the accuracy suddenly crashes. And the reason why it is, in summary, is because the network disconnects completely. At some point, the network just breaks down into many components, but it's still not what explains why it crashes. It's when the components have a small size enough. When the size reaches a particular critical size of each connected component, then the accuracy suddenly crashes. So I don't know. Oh, okay, perfect. So here I will go very quickly through this part, and the conclusion of this, do we generalize, is yes, actually. I studied the same task, so I won't go through the task again. There are small details that are different, but the task is exactly the same. It's just that the network is more complex. It's a directed recurrent neural network with particular dynamics. It can converge to fixed point attractors. It can have chaotic attractor dynamics, the same thing that Dr. Curto has presented. So the network is exactly the network that Dose et al. In Neural Network 1998 they used. So I won't explain it. It's just non-linearly activated neurons. The neurons have their particular dynamic. I also use Hebbian learning, so it's a very similar Hebbian learning than the Hopfield network. It's just that it's a dynamic network. And the task is very similar. I just use 2 stimuli instead of this 64 because the network is much more complex, many more parameters. It was harder to train. And here I can show here that I have also complex dynamic. This is just a typical graph that shows that these networks are able to have very complex behaviors. So these are control results. Same thing here. Before training, the network answered to a stimulus with a chaotic attractor activity. After training, quickly, when I put the stimulus, the network just converges to a fixed point. The activity doesn't change, which means it recognizes the stimulus. When I do it with an untrained stimulus, no training on that stimulus, the network still remains dynamic, is not able to react to that stimulus. So those are control. And the result, after training, after the task, is that variance pruning is able, even in directed recurrent neural networks, which are more complex, to improve and maintain high accuracy up to a certain sparsity level compared to stochastic pruning. So that also generalizes to this more realistic, let's say, and dynamic recurrent neural network model. That's it. And I will skip the conclusion. These are a lot of words just to basically show this graph. That is that we started from a fully connected neural network, completely inefficient, that is used in the literature. We converged toward actually something that looked like that small worldness that is seen in neocortex, because we have clusters, cliques. The clique size are actually about 2 to 5 nodes maximum. That's what we see, and they have indirect paths that connect each clique. So we have this intermediate structure that we got just with this variance pruning scheme, which look like the code. And it's 90% cheaper, 90% less connected. The brain, if you remember, the neocortex was 1 to 9% sparsity. And when we get lower than that, and maybe that's why the brain does, I don't know, just we get the disconnection of the network and the performance completely drops.